to the Yellowjackets Hive, presented by cordcutting.com. I'm Media Melanie here with...
And I'm Emily.
And we are back with another exclusive video. This time we're going to cover the inspiration of Yellowjackets. And lots of inspiration to be had, Emily, as we've found in our research and as we've seen.
Yeah, they were inspired by a lot of projects and shows and even movies that the fans love too.
Some of the inspiration is definitely pretty obvious and overarching, but some of it is more subliminal and you really have to kind of look to find it. So let's kick off with one of the inspirations that Ashley Lyle and Bart Nickerson have talked about, which is Lord of the Flies.
Read that in high school. I liked it from what I remember. It's a good story. Lord of the Flies was written in 1954, and it was a story about a group of British schoolboys who are stranded on an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean after their plane crashes due to an ongoing war, and the young boys happen to be the only survivors of the crash. I'm assuming that means there were adults, but only the kids made it. At first, the group attempts to establish order and rules, but their society gradually turns into chaos and violence, much like we see with the group in Yellowjackets.
That's right. That's right. And there are some similarities between some of the characters in Lord of the Flies and Yellowjackets as well.
Yeah, both Laura Lee and Lottie bear similarities to a character in The Lord of the Flies named Simon. Simon was viewed almost like a prophet, and he was seen very much as the religious leader of the group, a lot like Laura Lee was viewed to be. They really leaned into her for that spiritual support, specifically Lottie. But Simon also suffered from hallucinations similar to Lottie, at one point hallucinating the Lord of the Flies and directly communicating with him. And we have seen Lottie have hallucinations throughout both seasons 1 and 2. So, I mean, I feel like they took bits and pieces of each character and kind of infused them in multiple characters in the show. Because I've also seen comparisons of Misty to one character called Piggy, who tends to be not very liked by the rest of the group, and his contributions aren't as viewed as important, which we see with Misty.
Yep, a little bit more awkward of a character, maybe not as accepted by the group. So there's definitely a similarity there. And just the concept of, kids stranded in the wilderness and they make their own society and their own choices. And we see how it unravels. And Lord of the Flies is a really great example of that. And it makes a lot of sense that they drew inspiration from it.
For sure. I mean, in Lord of the Flies, in the movie, I've never seen it, but I've seen pictures of it. And as their society descends into madness, they start painting their face with war paint and stuff like that. So it is super similar to Yellowjackets because we've seen the deconstructing of the society happening before our very eyes with Yellowjackets.
We have, and just the imagery as well here on, the cover of the Lord of the Flies movie, we see them dancing around a fire with stakes, and it gives a little bit of the Cannibal Council sitting around the fire type of thing. And just the story itself, a classic story of conflict and survival. And Yellowjackets has both of those.
For sure.
On to the next inspiration. This one comes in a couple of different forms, but essentially at the heart is the Andes crash, the disaster, the Uruguayan rugby team. And of course, we saw that story told in Alive in the film and in Society of the Snow, which is a recent Oscar-nominated movie, which is on Netflix. Alive is an older book as well. It's from 1974, and it outlined the events of the Andes flight. The movie adaptation came later in the 90s with Ethan Hawke. Essentially this rugby team crashed in the Andes. They were carrying 45 passengers and they survived for 72 days. So Emily, how many people actually survived that Andes disaster / miracle?
Only 16 managed to make it out, and there were initially 45 on the plane when they took off. So for there to even be 16 that made it out alive in that scenario was crazy in my opinion, given where they were. Because when I watched Society in the Snow in particular, I did a lot of comparison between Yellowjackets and Society of the Snow as I watched. And I compared things like their environment. At least in Yellowjackets, their environment is a little bit more forgiving than the Andes Mountains are. They have trees, they have foliage, they have plants they can eat. There's none of that in the Andes. There's nothing like that. So they had no choice but to eat each other. And that decision came a lot sooner than we see in Yellowjackets for obvious reasons, because in Yellowjackets, they at least had the option to hunt a deer. They never had that choice when they were stranded in the Andes. But the crash in particular, I found really interesting, like comparing the two crashes and watching them, because you get footage from both Society of the Snow, Alive, and Yellowjackets in the plane. It shows what the pilots see before they crash. And I found that very interesting because it obviously looks a little bit different, but the similarity is that what you're seeing is something you're not supposed to be seeing when you're on an airplane. Like, you're going towards the ground, you're going towards the mountain. That's not supposed to be happening.
No.
And it really captured the fear that those people felt in that moment, 100% across
every single one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hands down. I felt the fear watching Society of the Snow, watching that plane rip apart and watching those people fly out. Like, that's terrifying. And the crash in Yellowjackets was equally as scary. I mean, Shauna opened up the window and all she saw were trees. That would scare the shit out of me.
Oh, it sure would. What do they call that area where all the planes crash in the Andes?
Valley of Tears.
The Valley of Tears. And that's because nobody ever survives. So truly, this was such an inspirational, miraculous story. We know that the Yellowjackets survive also.
In that picture that you just showed, if you look to the right of the man with like the bluish colored shirt on, if you look down at the snow, that's a human spine. Yeah.
They survived 72 days out there, which is obviously a lot less time than in Yellowjackets, but you can see a lot of the inspiration from these elements that Ashley Lyle and Bart Nickerson took for Yellowjackets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a story of survival, just like Yellowjackets.
Of course, the cannibalism, we cannot forget the biggest part about that. And actually, speaking of cannibals, that brings us to another inspiration, which Ashley Lyle and Bart Nickerson have said, which is, of course, the Donner Party, which is another true story. Tell us a little bit about the Donner Party, Emily.
So the Donner Party was a group of American pioneers who migrated to California via the Oregon Trail from the Midwest in the late 1840s. Everything went as normal for the first part of their journey until they reached the Sierra Nevada mountain range late in October of 1847. They were met with impassable weather that literally trapped them on the trail. They had no choice. There was a lake there that they kind of hunkered down, and it was renamed Donner Lake because of this. And the pioneers had no choice, like I said, but shelter in place with disastrous consequences. The party started with 87 members, of which 48 managed to survive, which
that's a pretty decent amount, actually.
And one of them actually managed to live until 1935, which I thought was really crazy. It happened in 1847.
Yeah. Oof.
Once all of their logical food choices ran out, because they obviously ate things like the livestock and the horses that they had with them on the trail, they did things that we saw them do in Yellowjackets as well. They boiled leather, just like we saw them do with Jackie's belt in Yellowjackets in an attempt to get nutrients out of the leather. So before they made the decision to start eating each other, they exhausted all options, just like we see them do in Yellowjackets.
Yeah.
They didn't want to eat each other, but if you want to survive at that point, you don't have a choice. So I had like a weird question after I was doing research about them, because at one point during the ordeal, there were two men that were purposely killed in order to be eaten so the rest of the group would survive, much like we see with the group at the end of season 2 with Hive. And it made me wonder if, like, I read somewhere that they might have used those men as some kind of like a sacrifice. So that made me wonder if that could have served for like inspiration for like the ritual that we saw them establish with the cards in some way. Because the two men that were killed were native men, like, to the area that they were stranded in, and they joined the Donner Party shortly before they were snowbound. They refused to engage in the cannibalism that the Donner Party was doing to stay alive, so they ran away in fears that they would be eaten. And they were found a few days later exhausted in the snow. They were both shot in the head. And then the hikers that found them ate them so that they wouldn't die.
It is what it is. You gotta do tough things out there. And sometimes if you're trying to escape and, you don't make it, really quickly back to Alive again, those guys made it out by actually venturing out of the Andes, like out of where they were trapped, and they sought rescue. And so it's funny, in the Donner Party, they tried to do that unsuccessfully, but they were successful, obviously, and alive. And that brings me to the point of, I wonder if that is how the Yellowjackets will get rescued. If they're going to be, if they send somebody out to actually seek help and seek rescue versus someone stumbling upon them out in the middle of the wilderness, which, by the way, if nobody does after this big fire, which we know they don't because they're still stranded longer, then in my mind, nobody's ever coming to rescue them if a big ass fire wasn't a signal enough.
If they're going to do something that's going to result in their rescue, whether it be hike out, like create another fire for a signal, I don't know. But the likelihood of somebody just randomly stumbling upon them is just too great in the area that they're in. It's way too vast. There's too much land. You can't cover it all. No, and we know they searched. Like, we know that they actually searched, but given how far they were off the flight path, they weren't even searching in the correct area.
No, they were not.
I keep going back to Natalie's markers that we see her leaving in season 2. She puts a piece of fabric, ties it to a tree to remember that they've been in that area before. But I feel like that might be important in the future. Like, somebody might stumble upon a marker and be like, why is this random piece of fabric on this tree in the middle of the woods?
It's definitely possible, unless it is Javi's friend or, Cabin Daddy's grandchild or whoever might be out there. They're not trying to rescue them. We all know that it is trying to keep them there. So unless it's some far outsider or maybe some people flying over in a plane on a hunting trip, I don't know. Odds are not great, which brings us to 2 TV shows. The first one is Twin Peaks. Of course, this was a David Lynch show in the 90s, and they said that he had such an incredible influence on our personal aesthetic and storytelling. So from a big picture perspective, that definitely ties in.
So Twin Peaks, the similarities that I've seen in reference to Twin Peaks has to do with the overall styling of the show, the way that we see the show as viewers. Particularly in season 2, there's a scene of Misty in the season 2 credits that rolls, and that is a shot of Laura Palmer, who is the title character in Twin Peaks, who is murdered, and the show revolves around investigating how she died, who killed her, all that good stuff. The title sequence, it's very reminiscent of Laura Palmer, the title character. One of the detectives investigating the crime is plagued by weird dreams throughout the course of the murder investigation too, which really are reminiscent of the dreams and hallucinations that Lottie is plagued with in the show. Because a lot of what we see with Lottie has some grain of truth to it. It may not be obvious, but what she sees, like, there's some form of truth that lies within that. The fireball behind Laura Lee's head, Laura Lee exploded.
The names. Let's even talk about the names. Laura Palmer, Cheryl Lee, Van Palmer, Laura Lee. Also, shout out to Kyle McLaughlin Love, who did this amazing post on Instagram with some different similarities. Really, at the heart of the show, though, it's about the murder investigation of this, like, homecoming queen type of girl who kind of gives Jackie. And now showing this tweet, we can just see, like you said, the styling. We see some very strong similarities between the lead character, Laura Palmer, and of course, Jackie, who also plays that prom queen, homecoming queen type of character. So
they look very similar.
They definitely do. And speaking of other similarities, we have like a strange symbol in Twin Peaks. And of course, we have a very strange symbol in Yellowjackets. Another styling standpoint here, Jackie and Laura Palmer. I mean, there's just so many.
That's creepy.
It is, right? And then we've got the man with no eyes, and then, this guy, and then this little one is cute. You are so sweet and naive and dumb. James is sweet, but he's so, so dumb. Just kind of that teenage angst. We've got this mirror scene with Ty, and then this other character in Twin Peaks. And apparently, there's also a horse situation in Twin Peaks that is reminiscent of the moose in Yellowjackets.
Yeah, a lot of visual similarities.
Kyle McLaughlin, again, thanks, because we've not watched Twin Peaks. We've, of course, read a lot about it and seen a lot about it, but they're speculating that they actually take place in the same universe, which is kind of interesting. I encourage you to go check this post out. They reference the owl diffuser is not what it seems. Jackie wears a heart necklace that she and Shauna both wear, and Laura Palmer Homer wears a heart-shaped locket that she and James both wear. The portal to the Black Lodge is in the middle of the woods, just like the cabin in Yellowjackets. The third season of Twin Peaks, now this is a really impactful one, takes place 25 years later, and the plot of Yellowjackets takes place 25 years after the crash. And there's also a one-armed man in Twin Peaks, and now we've got one-legged Ben in Yellowjackets. Both Jackie and Laura keep a diary. So
they're also both on Showtime.
Oh.
Twin Peaks originally started on ABC, I think, but when it was picked back up for later run, it was on Showtime. I'm gonna have to watch it,
especially if it's Yellowjackets-esque, and we've seen so much of that going around with fans doing that comparison. So and Lost, of course. One big difference between Lost and Yellowjackets, of course, in Lost, a commercial plane crashes on an island. In Yellowjackets, it is not an island. It is in the Canadian Rockies. But there are quite a lot of similarities just conceptually. We've got the Lost crash site here. And we've got the Yellowjackets crash site. And strange things happen in both of these shows, Emily. Really strange things.
They do. From the discovery of a weird hatch in Lost and a sequence of numbers that they thought had something to do with the plane being crashed, and polar bears and smoke monsters. The list goes on and on. A wheel that altered time. In Yellowjackets, the mysteries are more psychological.
Less sci-fi.
Yeah. Yeah. Were they really alone out there in the wilderness? What's the deal with the symbol we see? And what's going on with the man with no eyes? It's more in your head. Whereas with Lost, it was the things that were happening to them were happening to all of them. They're happening to all of them in Yellowjackets as well. But the smoke monster was something that they all saw with their own eyes. The man with no eyes is something that is personal to Taissa.
With Lost, I think, is the ending. I know a lot of the Yellowjackets fandom is worried that the ending of Yellowjackets will be like Lost. And Lost was one of those endings that you either loved or hated. I think more people skewed towards hated because, I didn't mind it either. I also didn't mind the end of Dexter, which apparently many people didn't like. But it'll be interesting to see how Yellowjackets resolves and if there's any similarity at all to Lost. But in my mind, I don't think so. It's a completely different show. I just don't see them going there.
I'm curious to see if Natalie will be anything like Jack was. Since Jack was the leader in Lost and he was very noble and everybody liked following him and liked the rules that he made. For the most part. You had Sawyer. So I'm really curious to see if how she'll take that role.
Yeah. Jack, I loved his character. Jack Shepherd, of course, was a figurative shepherd, leading in some way. As they all kind of looked to him, as you said. He was kind of a moral compass, very much like Natalie. Natalie's character journey is similar.
Kind of is, in a way, since Jack died and Natalie died.
Lost just got so wild. But you know what? We've still got seasons of Yellowjackets for things to get equally as wild. But again, I think it'll be in a different way. It'll be more of a mind fuck than a physical watching smoke monsters flying on your screen type thing.
I think a white moose is the closest we're going to get to seeing any polar bears.
It's a lot of fun to look at the inspiration from any TV show. And it's really great that they've actually talked very openly about this and where they've drawn some of their inspiration. And again, some of it shines through very clearly. Some of it, not as obvious, but still there. And they just do such a great job bringing it to life. And we're wondering, using similarities with other shows? If so, of course, drop a comment, let us know.
It's a lot of fun to compare them to others and see where they've pulled their inspiration for what they're doing. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for tuning in.
And until we spill again.